So we're going to go through some of these problems and we're going to graph based on the use of the slope-intercept form of the lines. So we can see in this first problem, we have the equation y equals 2/3 x minus 5. Now, we all know that this is already in slope-intercept form. We have y on the left-hand side by itself, then an equal sign, then a coefficient of x, and then plus or minus a number. Here in this case, it's a minus 5. So it's already in slope-intercept form. Now, when we're dealing with this, the first thing we have to do, obviously, is determine whether it's in slope-intercept form. And now that we know it's in slope-intercept form, we need to identify what number is the slope. Well, again, that's going to be the coefficient here of the x for the reasons I explained in the previous video. So our slope here is 2/3. And we need to identify the y-intercept. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. A lot of people just say, well, the y-intercept is -5. That is not correct. The y-intercept is the point 0, -5. It's that point where you plug in 0 for x and get out a y value. So some people misspeak and say the -5 is the slope-intercept. That is not correct. 0, -5 is the y-intercept. So make sure you actually identify that when you write things down. So now that we have the slope of 2/3 and a y-intercept of 0, -5, we can graph on some graph. So let's take a look at the graph. Now we always are going to start with the y-intercept. That, remember, is 0, -5 in this case. 3, 4, 5. So 0, -5 is right there. Okay, 5 units down along the y-axis. And our slope is 2/3. Remember what we said last time when we had a slope of 2/3. We didn't have 2/3, but this is the change in y over how much x changes. So a slope of 2/3 means that I should go up 2 and to the right 3 to get to my next point. And we can repeat that pattern after we get to the second point. We can get a third point by going again up 2 and to the right 3. Up 2 and to the right 3. And now we see the pattern here. By the way, 2/3 and -2 over -3 are actually the same fraction. If you remember way back in 1-1, a positive divided by a positive is the same thing as a negative divided by a negative. They're both positive numbers. So if you really wanted to, you could have also went down 2, that's the -2, and to the left 3. Notice you get the same line either way. So there's our line. Whoops, I should have drawn this a little bit straighter, but you see the points that we are connecting. So the line y equals 2/3 x minus 5 looks like that. Again, I kind of had a squiggle there, but you guys get the idea. Now let's go on to the next example. Y minus 2 equals -3/4 x. Well, this one is not in slope-intercept form. So in order to deal with this, in order to deal with the slope-intercept form in the way we want, we're going to have to put this line into slope-intercept form. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I have it here, y minus 2 is equal to -3/4 x. In order to get this into slope-intercept form, I simply need to add 2 to both sides. If I add 2 to the left-hand side, I get y by itself. If I add 2 to the right-hand side, that's going to be I'm going to be adding a term that's not like. So we're going to start out with a negative 3/4 x and then add 2. Okay, by the way, I put the plus 2 on the end of the right-hand side, in other words, on the right part of the right-hand side, just so that we have our slope-intercept form met, instead of having, obviously, 2 minus 3/4 x. The slope-intercept form traditionally is always has the term with the x in front and the constant term on the right. So slope here, negative 3/4. Y-intercept, remember, it is not just 2, but rather the point 0.02. So the slope is negative 3/4. The y-intercept is the point 0.02. And now I can go ahead and graph it. So I start at 0.2. 0.2 is right here. And then negative 3/4 is my slope. Remember that, negative 3/4. Now notice this is negative 3/4. You could put the negative on either the top or the bottom. When I think of this, I'm going to put the negative on the top. So I'm going to think of it like a negative 3/4. That way, when I say, well, how much is y changing? I'm going to go down 3, down 1, 2, 3, and x is changing by 4, so we're going to go to the right 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice that in the y direction, negative is down. In the x direction, positive is to the right. So that's why I went down and to the right. Here, down 3, 1, 2, 3, over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you see this pattern. So the line, I connect the dots, draw the line, make sure we have arrows at the end so that you can signify that this pattern goes on forever. So there it is. That's the line that we were supposed to graph. Now, when you are doing this on the homework, when you're dealing with this on a test, you will be asked to give the slope. So you'll have to write the slope in, and you'll be asked to give the y-intercept. So you'll have to write the y-intercept. And then you'll either be asked to identify the graph if you're doing an online homework, for instance, or you'll have to graph it by hand on your own if you're doing, for instance, an in-class test. So that's the idea. Now let's take one more example here on this video. Let's take y equals 2x. Well, in this one, y equals, I already have that on the left-hand side, and this doesn't quite look like slope-intercept form, but it actually is. Y equals 2x. I first off have a y by itself on the left-hand side, equaling, and then on the right-hand side, I have an x. So let's look at it as a Word document. Basically, or in this Word document, y equals 2x. Well, if we were to identify, remember the slope-intercept form looks like this. It looks like y equals mx plus b. Well, here, the m, that's our slope, the coefficient of x is a 2. So we can just write slope is 2. Now, here's where it gets a little bit weird, because b here, the y-intercept, we don't see it here. But you can think of this as like a plus 0, right? It's like y equals 2x plus 0. So the y-intercept is actually the point 0, 0, which we know is called the origin. The other way you can think about it is, remember, the y-intercept is what I get by plugging in 0 in for my x value. So if you were to plug in 0 in for your x value, you would have also got y equals 0. So you would have ended up with the point 0, 0. So the y-intercept being 0, 0 is interesting. The other interesting thing is that the slope is a whole number, not a fraction like we've had in the previous 3 problems. So how are we going to deal with a whole number as our slope? Well, this is where knowing some basic algebra comes in, or some basic arithmetic, I should say. Remember, the slope tells me how far I change in the y direction divided by how far I change in the x direction, but I don't have a division symbol in here. So we create one. And the easiest way to do that is to divide by 1. And so what we're saying is that the amount of change in the y direction is going to be 2, and the amount of change in the x direction will be 1. All right, so think of 2 as really 2 over 1, the fraction 2 over 1. And that's going to work not just with whole numbers, but with mixed numbers as well. If you ever have a mixed number as your m, you want to convert it to an improper fraction. Okay, so whole numbers, mixed numbers, we like to convert those to improper fractions when dealing with slopes. So here we go. Y-intercept is 0, 0. That's the origin right here in the middle. Excuse me. And then slope, remember, wasn't just 2, but rather we're thinking of it as 2 over 1. So we're going to go up 2. Again, since it's a positive 2, I'm going up in the y direction. And since this is a positive 1, I'm going to go to the right in the x direction. So I go up 2 and to the right 1. Up 2 to the right 1. And so the slope of 2 gives me this pattern. And then I can say, well, let's extend this line through these points, give a arrow on top, an arrow on bottom, and that's the line that I'm looking for. Y equals 2x. And there you go. That's how to graph using the basics of slope-intercept form. In the next video, we'll do a couple of kind of odd problems when we can't really get a good slope-intercept form, like y equals 7 and x equals -2. But we'll deal with those in the next video.